Hi guys, what a great spot. You know, I'm not gonna look at any of you because I got that out here. I wanted to start by saying that I really am one of you at heart, but I kind of gave up being one of you a number of years ago. I really am a professional HR person. I worked at very large companies, I worked at medium companies, I worked at small companies, and startups was kind of where I found my little niche. I started out in recruiting, and that's important to remember because I think recruiting gives you a different perspective. In recruiting, you know that every person is replaceable and that there's always somebody great out there, and you know how to measure your outcome. You talked to this many people, you did this many interviews, you made this many offers. Love that stuff. Which is why I love coming after Google geeks, because then I don't have to talk about data. Okay, this is the buzzword of the day, isn't it? I've been here for a couple of hours, and I think people have said this a million times. So I'm going to relate it to you in terms of when I began my evolution from being a professional HR person to becoming what I often described as, at Netflix, I was the COO of the culture, or I was the product manager for people. Right? So I stopped being that kind of business partner and became part of the business. And I remember the day it happened. The day it happened was in October of 2001. And that was the first, so Netflix was in business by 2001 since 1997. Most people don't know that. And the reason I remember that particular day in 2001 was that was the day we were completely flat broke. And I laid off a third of the company. So who's done a layoff in here? That's what I'm talking about. We know what that's about. And I decided on that day, after those folks left that contributed a lot and that we loved a lot, that I was going to stop telling the myths in HR that we say all the time. We are not your family. Anybody ever laid off a family member? You have? Whoa, dude. We'll talk later because I may need to know that. But I mean, so we use these words, and I'm going to talk about that a lot in my talk today. We've developed a language in our function that doesn't make sense to a lot of people. And the first one is the language of team, not family. And here's what I mean. Prasad said, you know, the sports team metaphor doesn't stretch completely, but it works a lot, right? And the thing about team and the thing about how we approach what we do in HR, you know, we went through this whole period where our function was to protect our companies from our evil employees. And I often tell people when they worry about it, they're like, you know, my general counsel says that's illegal, right? And I'm like, okay, we'll have your general counsel give you a copy of the statute or the law that says what you're proposing is illegal, right? And almost never is that true. It's that you might get sued. So I say, when you come to work in the morning, however you come, if you come on BART, if you are in New York and you take the subway, or you get out of your car in your Silicon Valley parking lot, and you look around at all those cars, say to yourself, they're all walking in to sue me today. And they're not. And furthermore, even if they were, why do people sue companies? You guys know. What's the answer? They're pissed, right? They feel like somebody treated them wrong. So I often say the way to avoid having your employees sue you is don't screw them, and that'll probably work. My experience is that everybody comes to work pretty much every day wanting to do a great job and go home and feel like they accomplished something with other smart people. And that they're fully formed, trustworthy adults. And I mean everybody. I don't think there's this hierarchy that like the IQ level goes from the C level to the part-time worker and drops significantly. And about the adult part, you know, I remember one time my CFO said to me at Netflix, hey, by the way, just thought I'd give you a heads up. We're going to have the people that work in the hubs in our distribution centers, we're going to have everybody do direct deposit. That'd be a lot easier for us in finance. I'm like, really? Would that be easier for you in finance? Woo, that's what I'm here to serve. They don't have bank accounts. He's like, who doesn't have a bank account? I'm like, well, you know, they take their check and they go by the cash it and they pay rent and car payment. It's not how it works. He's like, oh, I forgot they're not sophisticated enough. I'm like, no, the issue is that you're not sophisticated enough to understand the spectrum of our employees. And the thing about teams is they focus on results, right? And they focus on performance. And I think that that's really all that matters. And I think that's where we add a ton of value in terms of how we operate with companies. But in order for us to do that, we have to determine what high performance is, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And I've removed a couple of words from my vocabulary completely, and I'll talk about them as we go along, but I invite you to do so too. One of them is policy, and the other one is procedure. But I love discipline. You know, I love geeks. I love engineers. I've been in the Valley for longer than some of you have been alive. And you know, here's why I love them. Their world is black or white. It's good or bad. It's right or wrong. It's 0 or 1. And engineers are very, very disciplined. And so when engineers complain about a process that you're trying to implement, rolling out, initiating, and they start to whine about it, you want to really get under what it is that's bothering them, because they hate senseless bureaucracy and stupid process. But they don't mind discipline at all. I mean, writing code is in languages that have rules. So I want to tell you a story. About a month ago, I got the opportunity to speak at the Bell Center in Montreal, Canada. Does anybody know what happens at the Bell Center in Montreal? It's where the Stanley Cup is played. It's a hockey arena. And I didn't really know that much about it. And I was going to do a keynote talk like here, but instead they said, hey, we're going to change it up. We want you to talk about teamwork, and we want you to talk with this guy, Stanley Bowman. Stanley Bowman is the most winning National Hockey League coach ever. So I'm down below. I'm down getting ready to go on stage with Stanley, who's like, 70-something years old, and he's a lovely man. And we're talking about his grandkids and golf, and and he kind of taps me on the shoulder and he goes, "We're below the ice." I was like, "Well, that's kind of cool." So then we go up to the stadium, like up these stairs, 3 spotlights. My face is on the Jumbotron. There's 5,000 people out there, and everybody's like, "Oh, Patty McCord, nice, nice, nice." I'm like, "Wow, what a great reception." And Stanley walks up, and people like, "Whoa!" Standing ovation, like, I'm on stage with Stan Bowman. People are like trying to do selfies, like so he'll be in the background, because he's that cool. So the moderator says, Mr. Bowman, you've had the winningest teams over and over again. You've played with some of the best players in the league. How do you do it? And he said, well, we play an 80-game season. And every 10 games, I sit down with each player, and I run the statistics on how they're doing. They do a self-evaluation. I do an evaluation of them. I ask the other coaches for input, and often other members of the team, and we put together a plan to figure out what we're going to do with each individual for the next 10 games. And so the moderator says to me, you have a reputation for really hating the annual performance review, but I haven't heard you say what it is you would do instead. And I said, what he said. And then I went to Ireland from Montreal, and I got to be, again, the team thing. It's like you're going to see these people talk all the time. The guy who is the winningest coach of the Irish games. So do you know this, that the Irish have like their own set of sports that nobody else in the world plays? And they got all these names, things. Hurling, it's kind of like high ally, but with hard stick. I mean, it's weird, right? And he says sort of the same kind of thing. And he says, but what I look for in the team, the real guys that are really great, they have spirit. So that's the other thing I learned from the real team guys about team. So you got to play to win, right? So that's the deal about teams. But in order to create great teams, Prasad talked about this earlier, you have to have great talent. And some people ask me, you at Netflix, you always hired A players. Where did you get them? I'm like, well, there's an island that only some of us know about, and all the A players are there. We keep it very, very secret. And the issue about talent is not a particular person or a high performer. It's about the combination. It's about the fit. So because I worked with engineers my entire life, I came up with an algorithm. And you know what algorithms are. They're mathematical formulas that have to be true. And this is my algorithm for success. You can use it for yourself, and you can use it for anybody that you hire. Is what this person loves to do, that they're extraordinarily good at doing, something we need someone to be great at. And you know when you got the employee that was really great and then is walking around like whining all the time? I had this French guy one time, he's like, it was at the beginning of Facebook, and he decided that social networking was a really important part of the Netflix product, and he wanted to be on the platform, and he wanted it now. He made this big speech at one of our meetings, and we said, you know, gosh, we're going to prioritize to like 5 things that we can accomplish this year, and we're not going to do that. But he wouldn't stop. Right? So finally, I walked by in a meeting and he's like doing the French thing, you know, with his hands. So I bring him in and I'm like, Jacques, what the hell? Right? And he goes, well, as you know how I feel about Facebook. I'm like, we all know how you feel about Facebook, okay? But you run search. He's like, yes, I know, but. And I'm like, go to Facebook, okay? They'll take you in a hot minute. You're a brilliant engineer and I'll miss you terribly. But I kind of need the guy that's running search for us to kind of be into search, call me crazy, you know, and don't leave me stranded, right? But, you know, and by the way, if I remember interviewing you and looking at your career, your resume, don't you turn into a pumpkin every 3 or 4 years? Because you always want to work on the new thing? And we're on year 4. So Reed Hastings, he's like, did you talk to Jacques? I'm like, yeah. He goes, did you tell him to leave? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, why the hell did you do that? He's a brilliant guy. And I'm like, because it's the right thing for the company. The right thing for the company is to have a brilliant person in the job who wants to do that job. So here's a couple of other things about people who are misfits for their job. If you hire somebody that turns out to be technically incompetent, they're completely faultless in that scenario. You hired them, right? So when that happens, you want to go right back to that interview process and say, how did we miss these technical skills, right? Did we like somebody more than they could actually, did we not know what success looked like? And that happens too, especially if you're in a fast-growing startup. You're like, we need to get this shit done, and this person seems to like it, and so I guess they can. And it turns out that they can't. And my experience is that almost always, when things don't work out, it's because the business shifts and that person's skills are different than the skills that you need going forward. And any of you who want to talk to me about the good goodbye, we were talking backstage about firing. You know, weapons are not involved. You guys go, oh, we're going to go fire somebody. You better get that pistol out. Right? That's not what happens. And so if you have context around your business and you really know what teams are trying to accomplish, a lot of people have talked about this morning. You have your goals, you have your objectives, you know what you're going to do. Then you work backwards from those goals and objectives in a time frame. Oh, let's see if that happens and what's going to be different than is now. And then what is it going to look like? Are there more meetings? Are there less meetings? Is there more conflict? Is there less conflict? What's going on? How would this team work? Then you drop down and go, okay, I got that. And I've got my numerals, I've got my metrics. What would people need to know how to do in order to accomplish that? Oh, well, they might need to work very well cross-functionally. They might need to work externally. They might need all kinds of stuff, right? Then you drop down and go, what kind of skills and experience would it take for somebody to know how to do that in order to accomplish that by that time frame? And then and only then, who do you got? And those create the conversations around the deltas. I love you. Wouldn't be here without you. Woo, you did amazing work. I got to tell you, for what we got to do in the next 6 months, if you walked in the door, I wouldn't hire you. It's not that I don't think you couldn't figure out how to do what it is we need to do. I just don't think you can in 6 months because I'm kind of looking for somebody with 13 years. It's not going to happen in 6 months. And people can hear that, right? That's reasonable. That's logical. And so the way to create great teams, from my perspective, is to make sure in all of the communication that you have around teams, you include the following things: clarity, 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 clarity. You know, if somebody says, here's the goal, here's the overarching goals and objectives for my team's accomplishments, call your mom, and if she doesn't understand, then it wasn't clear. Okay? Honesty, like that part about that person I was telling you about. If the business shifts and there's not a place for them, tell them there's not a place for them and figure out how to make that work. The other thing is, if your company is amazing and you accomplish amazing things, you're going to be a great place to be from. What a concept, right? And if that's your job as professionals in the talent space, is to create opportunities for people to do amazing work so they walk away better equipped than when they walked in the door, then you're going to think about it differently, right? You're not going to start with the individual's career development. You're going to start with what the company's trying to accomplish and work backwards to the individual. So reality bites sometimes, and things change. And that's the other caution I have for you. You need to be the voice in every single meeting before the meeting closes to say, okay, hold on everybody. Did we make any decisions here today? And if we did, how are we going to communicate them? And let's practice before we walk out of the meeting, so that reality is the same for everybody. That, you know, the reality of what people hear in finance is significantly different than what people hear in engineering. Partly it's because how they parse it, but sometimes it's about just getting real about the consistency of the words that you use on communication. And then I personally think that the most admired trait in amazing people that I've ever found is the ability to have great judgment. You know, that's what makes great leaders, the people that make the right call when times are hard. So now I want to talk about transforming our function, most of us in the room. Okay, there's a couple things we got to stop doing. There's a lot of things we got to stop doing. But first I'm going to tell you another story. So I'm at Netflix, and Steve Jobs is called Reed, and Steve Jobs wants us, the streaming service, to be part of their, what we are to refer to as the transformational device. That transformational device you now know of as the iPad, but we were to say that word because nobody knew that word. And only 7 people from Netflix were allowed in the secret area where the transformational device was to be held. And of course, we had all this other stuff to do, and then we had to pull out a team to do it, because of course everybody wanted to be part of it. And so we rolled out, and it was the first video app on the iPad. And it was great. I mean, it was great. So I go running into my product meeting one day, and I'm doing what I do. Oh my God! Touch technology is amazing. It is transformational. I mean, it's human. It's like monkeys, you know, that you're going to swipe your finger and make something work. Last night I was at dinner, and the 2-year-old next to me was like streaming SpongeBob in his high chair. You know, I can't wait until I walk into my media room and I swipe the wall and a movie starts to play. And then around the room, the guys are like riffing. Right? They're like, hey, we won't make you get up. No, somebody else says, you pull out your phone and you'll touch it. Yeah, and the moodometer will say, oh, are you sad, Patty? And all of a sudden, you know, my favorite romantic comedy will start playing. And I looked around the room and I thought, wow, they're going to do that someday. I'm in the room with people who could do that someday. God damn it, why not me? Right? Why not me? How come I can't innovate? Right? How come we keep saying words like iteration? Right? And here's what innovators do. They start with the end game and they work backwards. They don't say, well, let's provide a streaming service on the iPad. Wonder what best practices are in this area. Because let's be real, best practices means what everybody else does. We don't measure it. We don't know that it's best, but we use that term all the time. They don't say, I know, let's put together a team of people and empower them. You know what they're going to do? They're going to put together a team of people who have power. Right? You know why we have to go around empowering people now? Because we took it all away. So I mean, seriously, when HR speak comes bubbling out of your mouth, I want you to stop and say, did I say anything that means anything to anyone other than another HR person? Seriously, I mean, I do. Occasionally I call my mom, right? And she's like, honey, that just sounds stupid. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Is that another one of those funny language things you and your sister talk about? That's a business thing. Okay? So the other thing is that when an innovator wants to create a new product, they think about what's that product going to do, and then they start making mistakes, right? And you know what happens when something doesn't work? What do they do when it doesn't work? They throw it away. Annual performance reviews don't work. Stop it. Throw it away. Right? We layer initiative on top of initiative on top of initiative. I was telling somebody this morning, I ran diversity programs at Sun Microsystems in the 90s. I rolled out global diversity initiatives. We celebrated each other. I spent $100,000 on the Cinco de Mayo celebration. We had tents. I had posters. We spoke at events. And guess what happened? Nothing. I am so angry that the data is so bad. I'm so angry about it. So don't go do that. Okay, first thing I want you to do, I want you to go back and fix pay equality. So write a check. Okay, what are the 3 departments that have the most women in them in any company? Marketing, PR, HR, and finance. We own 2 of them. Seriously. You know, how did Facebook, Facebook announced yesterday that they made it right. You know how they made it right? They threw money at it. Throw some money. Really, save the $100,000 on the Cinco de Mayo festival. And so I talked to this other guy, the CEO for him, and he goes, well, boy, my lawyers are going to go crazy when I tell them what you said for me to do. And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, you can imagine what's going to happen if I go and do what you said. I'm like, what? And he goes, I'm like, women are going to sue you. And he goes, yeah, they are. Why? Because they're going to realize I've been wrong. And I'm like, you are wrong. And they know it. So when we say best practices, really, is it really best practices? Fix the stuff we own. We own talent. We own what great teams look like. We own teaching everyone in our companies how to read a P&L. One of the best ways for people to understand where they belong, where they fit in a company, is to honestly to go through the math of the profit and loss statement. Oh, yeah, I did a really young startup on Brannan Street the other day, and one of them says, does anybody have any questions for me? And this kid says, and I mean, he's 20-something, so he says, yeah, how do you feel about departmental kegerators? I'm like, I drove a long way to be here with you today, and we didn't call them kegerators in my day, but there were kegs. So what are you talking about? And he said, well, in the fight for talent, company down the street, they got a kegerator on every floor. So, and this company happened to have swings and hammocks. I'm like, isn't just one swingy device enough per? I'm like, and you got hammocks in the lobby. What happens when your customers come? Oh, our employees are napping. Which I think is probably okay, but in the lobby? Would you nap in your lobby? In a hammock? It's just weird. Some stuff we do is just, if it feels weird, it's weird. Okay? Just let's use some common sense here, people, right? So I said to him, first of all, your customer, you don't have any internal customers. Your customer doesn't work here. And your customer gives you money for this service that you provide. That's called revenue. Then you take that revenue and you spend it on things like your salaries and the hammocks and the swings and however many kegerators you feel like you need to have. And that's the cost of doing business, right? And what's left over is profit. Oh, you guys don't have any. So those of us have been around through the Silicon Valley tech cycles more than once, or even once, know that we're at another cycle again. And that the best companies and the best teams and the best decisions actually don't happen when things are good. They happen when you have horrible choices to make. And the reason why at Netflix, when I stood up in October 2001, said we're a team, not a family, was because I wanted to be clear. And the second thing that happened, for those of you who read the Netflix culture deck, was we were doing twice as much work with a third as many people. And it was more fun. And that's when we wrote the chapter called High Performance. And we realized that matching of people, the right people at the right time. And then we went public the next year. Yay. And I looked around at all those fabulous people, and shit, a third of them were wrong. Because they'd never been in a public company before. And some functions in your business need to understand what being public is, right? And then we had to talk about, well, what about our transparency? What about our open communication? What about talking about the P&L every day? And so what we did at Netflix that was different was we wrote stuff down, and we wrote stuff down in plain English. And that created the culture deck that some of you have seen. That culture deck took 14 years to write. I didn't write it, Reed didn't write it. We did it as a group collectively, right? Millions, not millions, hundreds of thousands of people probably helped contribute to it. And you know why we wrote it in PowerPoint? Because it's PowerPoint. We wanted to change it, we just changed it. And when I stood up and say, hey, by the way, I'm going to get rid of like paid time off policy, and I'm going to get rid of the expense policy, and I'm going to get rid of the travel policy. I'm going to take all those people who give you permission, and I'm going to teach them how to report back to you. And then I want you to use good judgment about how you spend the company's money, right? And if it turns out to be a disaster, like the lawyers all tell us it will, then we'll go back and do what everybody else does. That'll be best practices. So I want you to go, you have homework. When you go to work tomorrow, I want you to walk in and everything that you do, every single thing that you do, every initiative, I want you to say, why? Why do we do this? What purpose are we trying to achieve here? And if I started with a blank slate, would I do this? Is that what I'd come up with, right? And the other thing is, be willing, just like any other innovator, to experiment a little bit. Right? Mess with it. If it doesn't work, don't do it. And everything we do doesn't have to be a global corporate human resources initiative. Maybe stop saying initiative. Maybe stick with like 2-syllable words for a week and see if you can do it, right? And become experts and advocates for the things we do extraordinarily well. The talent in the organization, recruiting, is the muscle. When I talk to startups, I tell my CEOs, that's the muscle of your organization. That's how you grow. And that the job of recruiting is the job of every manager in the company and every employee. We're completely socially networked now. If you don't know who the right person is to do that job, somebody knows somebody who knows. I always tell people when they're talking about interviewing in their own careers, I'm like, it's not what you know or who you know, it's who knows what you know. And encourage people to interview. When I talk to women's groups, I'm like, you want to know what your market-based pay is? Go interview. And they're like, I'm like, you're not cheating on your husband. Remember, engagement doesn't include a ring in this case, right? Just do it, okay? That's what I want you to do. I want you to just find a couple of things and mess with them a little. And the other thing is use these groups, use this venue, use this forum to talk to each other about what you're doing. Pick a couple of people that are like you. I have a group of people that I talk with in the Silicon Valley, in San Francisco. I call them my posse. And they're like, I'm thinking about a policy that requires people to take time off because nobody's taking vacation. I'm like, again, call your grandmother, say that out loud. It doesn't make any sense. Has anybody ever bonused anybody for taking a vacation? I'm like, ugh. So that's my presentation. Questions? You can do this. What do you guys want to talk about? Nothing? I've stunned you. What am I doing now? My partner Mike says whatever the hell she feels like doing. I do kind of 3 groups of things. I consult or advise startups that I like. I typically I'm much more effective at sort of mid-size companies that are ready for step functional growth that are going to make it. I'm not very good with the 30 people. You know, the CEO calls me, I'm like, go screw it up for a couple of years, call me back if you're still alive. You know, and they'll say, but if we had you, we wouldn't make those mistakes. And I'd be like, yeah, you wouldn't, because I'd tell you how stupid they are, but you wouldn't learn anything. It's really, really important that you learn yourself. Like, can you give me an idea of what one of those might be? I'm like you hired your sister's boyfriend and he turned out to be kind of an idiot. So you gotta fire him. And your sister's not gonna be happy. So go do a couple of those. So I do that, and I speak a lot. I say yes to, you know, honestly with HR people, it's changed a lot since I've left Netflix. When I was at Netflix and I would talk to HR groups, people walked out. They did. I mean, they were like, she's lying. What software do you use for your annual performance review? I'm like, well, I just told you we don't do an annual performance review. Maybe I asked the question wrong. No, you didn't ask the question wrong. No. So, but now, because now I think we're all realizing we can do this better, right? And that we're doing a bunch of stuff that's not mattering to our companies. And it doesn't feel good, right? You want a seat at the table? Earn it. Be part of the business, right? Be part of your business. That's what really matters. So I do that, and then I do sort of, I like the pay equality issue. I want that fixed, and I want it fixed now. So I'm mad. Hey, you.
I have a question about that, actually.
Yeah.
As a former internal recruiter, one of the things I've experienced is when women ask for more money, there's a reaction by HR. Mm-hmm. I encourage candidates to ask for more.
Here's what I tell women. How do I ask for a raise? I'm like, well, you got to stop binge watching Mad Men, because that's not how it works. So here's what we have to fix. That's what I tell women. If you go interview at a company and they pay you 20% below what your market value is, and they have a 6.5% merit increase budget with a bell curve distribution, salary bands and ranges, and you are amazing, and you get 12% because you're a high performer. Now you only suck by 8%. Right? The math doesn't work. If we don't true it up, the math doesn't work. And then we got to stop and say, hey, are our compensation systems protecting what we've always done? Are they really allowing us to pay market? And the reason why people are talking about pay inequality right now is because the market's tight. I've seen this before, right? Now we're all sensitive because we don't lose anybody, right? Because the demand is higher than the supply. Guys, it's really a lot like real estate, right? It really is. Not every job pays the same. Your salary bands can change if there becomes a supply-demand equation. So I suggest that what you do is look to your recruiters for compensation. I used to tell people, I'm like, listen, when the headhunter calls, before you say no thanks, be sure you say how much and come tell me. And I would send people like, I'd go interview at Google. No, I don't want to interview at Google, it takes forever. I'm like, please. I want to know what they're paying people in that position. So go back, again, go back and go, wait a minute, is our system getting us the right people? And you've got to be the advocate for this other team. I did this talk at the CIO group in Washington, D.C., and at the end I did my call for, just go have your HR people run a spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need a lot of data analysis. Give me every job title, average male salary, average female salary. If there's a discrepancy, fix it. So afterwards, this guy says, you know, I'm a senior executive vice president at my company where I've been for 26 years, and I'm very successful. I'm like, congratulations. And he says, and the reason I'm successful is because my Fortune 50 company is very fiscally conservative. And I'm really good at saving the company money and getting bargains and getting the best deal. I'm like, that sounds like a great thing to do. And he said, but if I hear you, you're saying if a woman comes in and she's making 120, and a man's coming in and he's making 140, I should pay them both 160? I'm like, that's pretty much what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what you pay the man, that's what you should pay the woman. He goes, well, why would I do that? I'm going to spend $30-something thousand of my company's money that I don't need to. I said, oh, John, thank you for sharing that. That's very logical. What are you going to tell your daughter when she comes home and tells you that story? And he goes, oh, it'll be fixed by then. It'll be fixed by then. Right, so we have to be the advocates for that. And the other thing is, forget all the passion I have around it, just do the math. Like, okay, guess what? We're not gonna do the picnic, we're gonna true up salary. How about that? It's the same amount of money. I mean, we're not screwing people in Silicon Valley and tech. I mean, our discrepancies are very low. But the other thing I found for women in tech in particular, particularly for women in engineering jobs, is that they just can't catch up. You know, you start out low and you can't. And you know when we'll start fixing things? When people, and what I tell women is vote with your feet. Don't wait for that company to realize. If they don't realize it already, then go to another company that will. It's your career. So I'll leave you with that too. I mean, our relationship with people is a 50-50 relationship. You don't own their career, they do. Right? Other question?
Over here. Hi,
Yeah.
Patty. Sharon Richmond.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Long time.
It is.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about the way to think about compensation when you're using OKRs. And we've talked today about how to make sure you're decoupling. And I know you have some pretty interesting thoughts on compensation.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of bonuses. And I'm not because in my mind, you expect high performance from everybody. And if why would you want somebody that couldn't make their performance bonus? And do you ever not pay a performance bonus? Oh yeah, when you fire them. Here's what you could do. You could just fire them and pay everybody else their performance bonus as part of their compensation, right? So I think OKRs are really important, but I measure results rather than the goals. Partly because Netflix was so dynamic. But now that I'm out in the big world, we're not the only ones. We're all so dynamic. So the problem for me with some of the bonus programs tied to things like OKRs is the administrative overhang is just not worth it. And I think it's really important to set clear goals, but I'm sort of a believer in that's at the local level, that's at the team level. Right, and that whole rolling them up and rolling them down, and like, keeping the software and tying to compensation, and and then you change it, and then we got to recommunicate it all. And with my startups, I'm like, seriously, just don't go there. Don't go there, because you're going to spend a third of your time just trying to figure out if you're wrong, were you wrong, why are you wrong, instead of just going, whoop, we're wrong, let's do this. So that's what I think about. I think that we have a tendency to over-complex things. And because if you believe in market-based pay like I do, then there's really not that much of a correlation. If you achieve your OKRs, you're going to be worth more.
So how do you do the market POs?
It's hard because we don't have systems for that, right? I mean, I wish we'd throw away a whole compensation system, take all those people and try and figure out how to do market-based pay. It's in your staffing org, right? You have the data, you just don't keep track of it, right? And it's with each other. We all do this. What are you paying us? Well, what are you paying a graphic artist these days? Because the last one I heard, interviewed made twice as much as the one before that. It's like, oh yeah. Pay attention to the trends and what's happening. We've always been good at doing that. Is my time up here?
Just one more question over here.
Yeah.
Okay, hi. Wanted to get your perspective on the cultural transformation that happened between the private and the public side of Netflix, and maybe any lessons learned or insights you can share.
Yeah, you start having to ask yourself a lot of questions because you're pressured to keep a lot more secrets. And so there are things that are associated with that. So for example, we decided to keep the trading window very, very narrow because we wanted people to have access to a lot of internal, would-be material non-disclosure, right? Material non-public information. So we tried to keep that window really small. And that was an experiment we tried, and we thought, employees are going to be really upset. We did crazy, crazy stuff with stock. We granted stock options monthly, fully vested, 10-year term. Consider that, right? And we allowed people choice in terms of how much equity, how much salary they wanted. It's harder to do when you're a private company because equity is so much part of the compensation system. If you're a startup, if you're a smaller company, a pre-public company, you have three forms of compensation at your fingertips. You have salary, you have title, and you have equity. And I tell very small startups to bank one, bank title. Because whoever you call an executive vice president in the first 100 people, you are just wrong. You are, right? For one thing, you don't need an executive vice president for 100 people. So, keep, here's how you know it's time for some discipline instead of that sort of organic stuff that happens in a small startup. I call it the stand on the chair model. When I could no longer talk to everybody in the company by yelling, standing on a chair, then I needed some discipline. And I think the other thing is when you become bigger, you go public, and you start to become a more complex organization, the most important thing to constantly revisit is your heartbeat of communication, right? I could stand on a chair spontaneously, hey everybody, get out in the parking lot, Patty's gonna stand on a chair and tell you something, right? But then it was like, now Netflix has quarterly management reviews that happen all over the world, and people fly out and do 3-day business seminar stuff, right? And that just wasn't necessary at a small size. But that's when it starts, this because you're in the organization. When you hear your executive team make a statement, tell you how it is, and then you're down here, and it's like, oh no. That telephone tag, this person didn't hear what you said at all. So then a lot of times that's around, maybe we should meet more often, maybe we should meet less often. I consulted with a game company in Norway, and whenever I do the offsites with the smaller startups, the issue is always communication. Isn't the issue always communication? I mean, really? So why don't we own that, right? So he says, I don't understand why they're so confused about what we're doing. We meet every Friday. We meet every Friday, we talk about what we're going to do next week, and then we meet, on Friday to see whether or not we've done it. And I'm like, oh, well, they know how to go, they just don't know where. It's too granular, right? So then everything is a report back meeting instead of, I'm like, they're waiting for you to tell them a bigger picture, a bigger story. And he's like, well, how do I come up with a big story every week? I'm like, well, you don't do it every week. You do it, maybe it's time for a monthly meeting, maybe it's time for a quarterly meeting. So pay attention to the heartbeat of your communication in your company. That we do really well, right? That we're experts and advocates for. We're the ones that can go back to the organization and say, I remember Reed, I'll leave you with this one. I'm like, things aren't going well out there, it's kind of funky, right? He's like, what's your data? How many people did you talk to? What exactly did they say? And in the early days, I'd have to say, I asked the following 12 people the following 6 questions. And then over time, he'd be like, how's it going out there? I'm like, let me go find out. And the other thing is to observe when things are great, because you see them, and then dig in there, right? That's why I'm saying you don't need HR metrics. You don't need them. When the CFO wants to close the books in 2 weeks instead of 3, and they've been working on it for 6 months and nothing happens, you go to finance, they're like, oh, it's the IT guys' new software, it doesn't work. You go to the IT guys, they're like, those finance people, they can't give us a good spec. And then you dig in. And then you find out, well, actually the people in finance who do data entry don't want to use the new software because it's going to eliminate their job, and so they're going to passively resist until hell freezes over and have fuzzy fuzzy requirements that nobody can make, and they're in a complete impasse, and it's never going to get together, right? So that's a business problem. There's a business solution that you have to drive, not like they're unhappy in finance and they're frustrated in IT. Thanks.